Welcome to the Power Hour, Optometry's longest running and biggest show. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman, and as we get into today's conversation, quick reminder to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen, just so that you know each time a new episode comes out. So you've heard me talk this season about how the industry data that we're seeing is clearly coming at us from two different directions. Number one, our patients, they're more cautious about spending money, so we have to work harder for it. Number two, there's a substantial economic opportunity at the macro level over the next few years for the practices that choose to invest in themselves. And both of these data points require us, practice owners, people who work in practices, require us to think about how we take action to move forward. So on today's show, I invite Dr. Jeff Lewis. By the way, Jeff is a well-respected consultant. He's a marketer. He's a practice growth expert and has over 25 years in clinical experience. So I invite Jeff Lewis to join me to talk about action. And we take a little bit of a different twist. We don't just talk action. We actually talk about inaction, and more specifically, the cost of inaction. Now, this is a concept that Dr. Lewis developed over the years. And while he breaks it down specifically and precisely for his clients, I thought it'd be very interesting to apply the concept of the cost of inaction at the general sense to a typical practice. So we spend the episode talking about cost of inaction, inaction in answering the phone, inaction in answering it well, inaction in presenting well to your patients, inaction in coaching or educating your staff, or inaction in helping your associates do better. We talk about inaction related to patient communication, or an action related to Google Ads, or overspending on your marketing, or underspending on your marketing. The bottom line is that inaction, which you can think of as being stuck in the status quo, not doing something different. Inaction costs you money. And we do some quick calculations during the show, and we find tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars for a typical practice. So as you listen in, maybe, and I'll challenge you, maybe you can quantify the cost of inaction for your practice. And hopefully it can serve as a motivating factor to help you to take massive action and drive your practice towards your goals. As always, I encourage your feedback. Please go to eugeneshatsman.com. Let me know what you think about today's episode. Ask questions, get in touch. Again, it's eugeneshatsman.com or the Power Hour website. I love being a resource for you and your practice. And here's today's show with Dr. Jeff Lewis. Dr. Jeff Lewis, excited to have you back on the Power Hour.
I am excited to be here again, Eugene. Thank you for having me.
Well, your last episode got rave reviews, so I'm super excited to do this with you. And, the topic we're going to cover today, this whole concept of cost of inaction, I've heard you lecture on it, and I thought it was super impressive material and really interesting perspective. And I kind of realized as you talked that you are truly uniquely qualified in the context of this perspective. And so I'm going to ask you to give the audience maybe just a 45, for those who don't necessarily know you, just 30 to 45 second background on the CV that placed you at this exact moment, at this exact time to be talking about this exact thing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kind of tie this together. And, cost of inaction is one of those things that I wish I had known about, like a lot of things I wish I had known about when I bought my first practice. And, that was 25 years ago. And I've been a serial entrepreneur throughout that period of time. And I've owned a couple of practices. And, along the way, have experienced what it is like, I think, at every cycle of practice ownership, whether it's, feeling like maybe I wasn't running things and the staff was, or listening to phone calls like that are happening across the office and like having some unbelievable ability to hear over, many square feet, and cringe about a conversation that's happening with a patient. But I fell in love and became enamored with really the marketing side of the business, in the overall landscape of business operations early on, and in the beginning where digital marketing kind of became something accessible to small businesses. I found immediate success and hope, and developed a passion for the ability to create true measurable ROI. And now fast forward, I've become a marketer, and I work with some of the fastest growing and most successful practices in the industry. And so I'm also kind of in the trenches now from a consultancy standpoint for those practices. And so I've had another, another way of dipping my toes into, what is the work that we're doing? How does it create a return on investment? But again, most importantly, as of late, I've realized that there is this component, this sort of, I think, resistance to inertia that we call cost of inaction, versus, and sometimes related to return on investment as well, or cost of acquisition. But cost of inaction has become sort of a way to kind of interconnect these aspects of the KPIs that we care so much about, and we're always focused on, and wanting to kind of present and tell a story about the ways that we can help these practices that we work with grow.
Yeah, and let's zoom in on this concept of cost of inaction, because I think we oftentimes think about costs associated with action, and whether it's I'm going to buy this piece of technology and it's going to cost me X amount of dollars, or I'm going to select this building and then I'm going to hire this person. And oftentimes we understand that those costs sometimes have an investment component, but the flip side of this, the whole concept of cost of inaction, explain it, please.
Well, I think the easiest analogy might be, it's a simple analogy that if you are at a stage in life where you've always known that certain activity was good for you, and let's say it's going to the gym and working out, or developing and evolving an exercise regimen. And it's easy when things are okay, or there isn't so much of a cost of not doing it. But at some point, maybe it's because you've become middle age, or maybe you've been to the doctor, and it's been recommended that or you found out that you had a certain condition, and that now there was a real kind of a weightier risk about not going to the gym or not doing something, and about it. And I think that analogy translates to the business world in the way that there are a number of internal, factors, internal things that are constantly in flux or in motion, and also external, influences that are part of what we have to kind of dance with as the life cycle of practice progresses.
Well, and it's interesting that you use that example, because it hits relatively near and dear to my heart. And I've been traveling and speaking at conferences recently. And so I almost feel guilty whenever I don't make time to exercise. But that guilt, I haven't, until very recently, I haven't actually equated it with a cost. It was just more of well, I guess I didn't work out today, I'll try to hit it hard tomorrow type of thing. And what I found is that if I think about it kind of as an equivalent of, well, this inaction that I had is not quite as bad as if I had taken action directly against my goal, like eaten I don't know, a half dozen donuts or something. If I'm trying to keep my body on a healthy track, well, I didn't eat the half dozen donuts, but I also didn't take action towards my goal, and because I didn't take action towards my goal, that actually kind of worked against my goal. And until I started seeing it that way, I really didn't feel like I had increased my motivation, and honestly, I haven't started pushing hard towards a fitness goal until I started looking at it that way. And I kind of give you a lot of credit towards at least opening my eyes to this concept of cost of inaction. And, I don't know, should we start with a simple example that everybody can connect with? What's an example of inaction that happens in practice every single day?
Well, I think the one that and we've talked about this in a previous episode. I think it stands out. It's difficult to get the phones right. We have we are listening to and I personally listen to phone calls all the time on behalf of our clients, and work on ways in which we can kind of improve the conversion of those phone calls, at least the appointments that come from those phone calls. And we know that, from listening to these calls, that anywhere from 25 to 30% of those calls are, appointment opportunities. And that's an easy way, and like one pretty simple area of it has a direct effect on if new patient growth or even retaining patients is important. That is a key. When you are already investing in resources to bring those patients to the phones, and then leaving them, and I don't want to say in the lurch, but not able to convert them, it kind of drives me insane. And it is an easy one, I think, to address. Although there is, again, this, I think, built-in resistance or inertia, because it does require addressing it. It does require some operational training and, and some creativity perhaps. And, and that training and, whatever we come up with needs to fit with the practice. But I think from what I've observed, it's very easy to let that kind of thing go, to where now there's a cost associated with, not being able to convert, patients who are calling your practice.
And we're going to get into much more sophisticated examples in a moment, but I'm going to try to break this down for a moment for the audience. And again, if you are really interested in bettering your phones, we have a previous episode that Jeff and I have recorded specifically focused on phones, and we got a lot of feedback from the audience that it was helpful. Feel free to go back and listen to it. But let me just kind of break this down. So let's say the practice gets 100 phone calls in a week. Actually, no, that's too small, right? What's a good number for a practice to get in a week? 250?
Let's say they're getting 2,000 phone calls, and maybe 25 to 30% of those calls are appointment opportunities.
Okay, so let's say in a month, practice gets 2,000 phone calls. Of those, 30% are appointment opportunities. So that's now 600 phone calls. Let's start with the very basics. Let's just assume that you're not answering some percentage of those phone calls, because when we listen to practices, at least 10%, and often it's upwards of 35% of phone calls during business hours just don't get answered. People are too busy, and people just don't do it. So of those 600 phone calls you just mentioned, right? Let's just pretend that 30% of those calls didn't get answered. That's 180 phone calls. 180 phone calls, even if half of them are patients who don't actually show up, that's 90 patients. 90 patients times, I don't know, I'm going to make this up and say $350 per average patient. That's $31,000 a month of inaction. And the inaction is simply not answering the phone. You didn't take the action to answer the phone, and you flushed $31,000 down the toilet. So that's one example, I think, and we can get into what's a good phone call, what's not a good phone call. And, in the episode that we discussed, I think we talked about how do you move the needle from turning 70% of your patient opportunities, which is a pretty good number for an average practice, 70% of your patient opportunities into actual patients, to 109% of your patient opportunities into actual patients. And that delta, that 39% delta, it stands to increase a practice's revenue and bottom line substantially. And that's also a cost of inaction. Not taking the action to make your team better, to do that is also a huge cost of inaction. Anything you want to add on the phones before we zoom in on a couple of the more sophisticated topics?
No, I think that's good. I think we could move on to the next one.
Let's say, and I don't know exactly where you want to go. Do you want to go inside the practice, or do you want to go before even the phone rings?
Yeah, I mean, so we have external factors for sure. We can talk about the economic environment or competition. I think a good one maybe within the practice, because the numbers are staggering. I mean, I think I heard you mention them the other day, and I don't think I'd thought about them for a while. But the number of how many patients in the average practice are coming in with either signs of dry eye or outright symptoms of dry eye or difficulty wearing contact lenses, et cetera. And many practices, I think, have, adopted are comfortable with the idea that, we have ways of managing these patients. Some have invested in, the technology to, have a deeper conversation about it and, to treat, beyond sort of the bare minima. But there is, and you and I talk about it all the time, and there's a significant, I think, another cost of inaction associated with leveraging the tools that we may have dabbled in. We may have purchased that mybographer, but it's collecting dust, or it's covered up in the other room, or we haven't talked to the associates about talking to patients about it, or we haven't really worked on the script for how we're going to talk to the patient about it, and then the transition. Maybe we haven't gone as far as hiring a champion that can have the conversation about, like, there's the treatment that Dr. Lewis recommends, and so forth. So I think the dry eye example is great, and we probably hit on that a little bit more.
Well, you just said a lot, Jeff, because in all reality, there's at least 4 points that you just touched on that are really, that there's inaction that leads to significant cost. So in the 4, I'll summarize them and let's dig into each one of them. So one of those points is just not having the conversation with the patient, just simply not spending the time. That's inaction, right? Not spending time with the patient, or not spending the time to have the conversation with the patient, or introducing the topic in a subpar way. I would categorize that as one. Another one is not investing in the staff, right? And is not investing in your team to be able to communicate the value of that procedure or that treatment. I think number 3 is not teaching your associates. Right, I've plenty of scenarios where one doctor is standout, oftentimes the owner, and then the associates, we just can't get them to do anything. And then the 4th is the process. The inaction to establish a proven process that ultimately maximizes the value of whatever investment you've made in the practice, whether that's time or resources or equipment. The reality is that all of those, deciding that you're going to treat dry eye patients and you're going to have a dry eye protocol, ultimately puts you in the driver's seat to say, okay, if I can set those 4 things up, then I've got real opportunity to make to optimize this business opportunity that I've invested in already. So let's start with the not talking to the patient enough, and let's just calculate the cost a little bit here. But for example, when I'm in the patient room, Jeff, what could be happening? Or what's the inaction? What's the point of inaction in the patient room?
Yeah, so I think that having the conversation, having the asking the questions, caring, and translating that care into an inquisitive conversation, one that is you're ready to educate the patient on what you see, what a protocol might look like. Just even raising the issue. I think it's easy to not see a symptom, yet you see the signs, but if they're not complaining, is it worth having that conversation? So that is a true cost of inaction, because you just miss the entire opportunity, right?
Right. And of course, I see something here, and if you want, my staff can set up a consultation for you. That's a subpar conversation, right? What we know is that if the doctor says, and we've had other guests on the show who have talked about 80% acceptance in treatment plans, and what we know is that if the optometrist presents the issue and presents a level of concern and says, "Hey, this is this is what I see. This is why I'm concerned, and I really I'd like to schedule a follow-up visit for you, even if it's whatever you call it, the dry eye workup visit, or however the flow works. But I'd like to schedule the follow-up for you because I'm a little bit concerned." That's a different conversation than, we have the stuff that could potentially help you out, and maybe Susie at the front desk, and we can talk to her and see if you want to set up a time. We know that that's a less than 10% acceptance of a treatment plan when delivered without confidence, when delivered without a process, and when delivered without, like you said, kind of a clear link to the patient's, to the conversation you just had with the patient.
Yeah, and I think that and it goes beyond like the patient leaves, and there's also an opportunity to, again, we know that this is dry eye is super prevalent, and so imagine the cost or the missed opportunity, which is also like a cost of,
Yeah.
We can go through the math. You're better at the math than I am, but we could work through the math on that, but. There's
Well,
also
let's do it. Let's give the audience a reason to listen. So, okay, so an average dry eye patient is going to spend how much?
I don't know. Let's
2,000?
say, let's use 2000.
2,000 is a low number because I think that what we know is that once a dry patient's in treatment, they're going to come back again and again, and they're also going to refer someone. So 2,000 is a low ball number. So we're going to use 2,000. Okay. So if average doc sees 15 patients a day, how many of those patients are going to be dry candidates? Candidates, not accepted a treatment plan. Ballpark.
Like half of them.
Okay, so let's just say 7 a day. 7 a day times 20 times 20 days, whatever. Seven a day times we'll call it 4-day work week. 16 days a week, or sorry, 16 days a month. That works out to 112 patients a month. Okay, so that's 112 patients a month that are candidates. Now you got two choices. You got deliver do everything you're supposed to do so that 80% of the patients, and we'll go through the other points of inaction, but 80% of the patients accept the plan versus 10% of the patients accept the plan. So I'm going to call that the delta is 70%. So the cost of inaction is 70% of 112. So times 0.7 works out to 78 patients. So I got 78 patients times $2,000. Now this number sounds crazy, but it's $156,000 per month is your cost of inaction. Multiply that times 12, that's almost $2 million.
Yeah.
$1.8 million is your cost of inaction to not do the four things Jeff mentioned in the beginning. And that's just with the dry eye patients, right? And again, we think the difference, 80%, 10%, whatever, pick your own numbers, right? But this whole concept of what's it costing me not to take action is the big premise here. So, okay, so let's kind of bounce through the other three and work through the rest of this example here. So we've got the doctor. The doctor, we'll call it the "I'm concerned" conversation. The doctor saying, "I need to see you back for a consultation." Then we've got the staff. So sometimes the patients hand it off to the staff. What does the staff do? What should we be doing? What's the point of an action that we should be maximizing?
Well, staff. It's a great opportunity to build another layer of rapport. Staff that's been well trained and educated and also passionate. Maybe they're incentivized to have that conversation and to take it a step forward and to sort of own the next step in that conversation. Oftentimes, the inaction is that the staff isn't really sure about what's happening. They haven't actually seen what goes on in an IPL treatment. They're not aware. It's something the doctor does in the other room, or they're really not. They haven't been well educated. So it comes down to an operational inefficiency or inaction.
Yeah,
case.
What I found that's super interesting, and I heard this actually from somebody who works in an office. I was at a conference and I sat down, and I was an office manager at the table at lunch, and I had asked her about her experience with IPL, and it was exactly what you just said. She said, I didn't realize I had dry eye until I got some treatment, and I felt a lot better. And the doctor treated me for free, and I'm so freaking happy about it. And I didn't realize what these things did, and now I tell all the patients about it. And she's an office manager, right? Or she's a manager in the office, and maybe she's maybe she's not the office manager. She's just a manager in a mid-size office. And I found that to be interesting that, developing champions oftentimes requires time, and it doesn't just require a little bit of a conversation. It might require an example. It might require, sort of a hands-on type of stuff for the staff so that they're bought in. And the other thing that I found, and I think this is so true in pretty much every part. It's not just in specialty services. It's in the frames that practice it or that get recommended and that kind of thing. Is that the staff find themselves in a place where, well, if I don't have $2,000 to spend, then I'm not going to really assume that the patient does. Right. And the patient might not have the $2,000 to spend on this. So I'm really going to kind of tell them to kind of shy away from that because I connect with the patient. The patient's like me. I wouldn't spend $2,000 on it. They won't spend $2,000 on it. So breaking through that mindset is extremely important. We could probably do a whole show on that. That's separate. But the reality is that the staff can sometimes be your biggest barrier subconsciously without themselves even knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the example of, the staff having had an experience with a procedure. And it could be as simple as like, if you have a specialty contact lens practice and you want a champion for that, you find your INR specialist, but, have them put on the lens themselves, like teach do it. I just had actually for the first time, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, but I just had my first experience with IPL. I had a procedure last week, and I got to experience it. And there were certain aspects of it that I did not expect. I hadn't thought about because I haven't done one, and I hadn't had one done to me. But I know a lot about it, and it immediately transformed my my opinion, my enthusiasm, my perspective to where I felt obviously. I felt a little better immediately, but the experience itself, immediately turned me into a champion. And I think we have those. And I think that, we were, I just want to interject this as well. We were talking about, we added up the dollar value of the cost of inaction for the dry eye patient. But, and you had mentioned that, yeah, that's just dry eye. Like, what about the other, opportunities within the practice, whether,
Exactly.
Whether it's a specialty, spectacle lens or contact lenses or myopia management or any of these specialties, but missing out on that amount of, revenue, that has like an interconnected effect, a trickle down effect on, how we make decisions, because it's, think about the cash flow that we all have to dance around, and think about the extra amount of revenue and what that could have done to enhance these other areas, adding another specialty or, opportunities to, move or, reallocate resource, maybe even marketing resource, in some cases.
Well, that's a really good point because the cost of inaction also creates limiting. It creates a bunch of limits for everybody else, including that same staff. Including the staff that wants a raise or wants some additional training or whatever benefit you can potentially offer with your $2 million of newfound revenue, simply from being able to get people to accept the treatment at a higher rate. And you make a really good point, is that you as a marketer, you got to go through an IPL procedure and you did it as a marketer, and that makes you a better marketer now and a better advocate and a better resource for your client that, I'll probably perform that on you, which is phenomenal, right? But it also, and you're thinking from the marketer's perspective, but also think about the impact that it has on everybody who works in the practice, which I think brings us to one. I just wanted to close the loop on the whole associates concept, is that, I've done this training, you've done this training, but the question becomes, okay, well, I have an associate who is just not doing, the inaction is that I don't have the inaction. The associate has the inaction, which ultimately is, okay, well, you have the inaction because ultimately you're not engaging the associate in a way that ultimately supports that. But how do you deal with that, Jeff?
Well, that's another episode probably. So we'll have to plan that. But yes, like I think that requires action and the part of internal operation, training, communication, case study, like sitting down one-on-one. And, most associates these days, most of the practices that I have like direct experience with, have some sort of incentive, for associates but that's not always what motivates people. Not, it may not be that, the monetary incentive is the end all be all, but it's important to find out what it is and to be able to, present and make it um, a project that, that feels like everyone has, an oar in the water, that we're going down the river together, and that we have, we're in this together, and we need a little bit more paddling this way, we need move a little bit that way. And so I think that there's tremendous opportunity, and that often is an easy one to not act upon, because there's resistance to talking to colleagues about like performance. And I didn't get a lot of training about how to motivate someone, to a salesperson, because it becomes like almost a sales conversation, and we all want to avoid sounding like we're selling. And so it is fraught, and a lot of these costs of inaction, or these like getting stuck in this low inertia state, they have there's real resistance around them. Like, not saying that they're easy to break through, but they do have a significant enough cost where the motivation to get through that inertia or break through that resistance, I think, is very much worthwhile.
Well, and I think that's so true. And the reality is, and I've had this conversation several times, but you talk to a doctor says, I just don't understand why my associates don't do this. And you end up in this, well, when was the last time you guys had a meeting? Oh, well, we meet once a month or whatever. Okay. And what do you guys do at that meeting? Oh, well, we catch up and we talk about stuff. And it's like, okay, well, what KPIs do you review together? And what data points? And what's your process for chart review? And what's your process for observing each other and, providing each other feedback and that kind of stuff? And then you end up in a place where it's like, well, it was uncomfortable, so we stopped doing it, or we never did it. And this discomfort, I'm not saying that inaction is like, there's good reason for why inaction exists in so many practices. It's just that I think what our hope is during this episode is to kind of prime our audience to think about, well, okay, this exists. And, well, what can we potentially do to motivate you to take action? Because we have to realize that the cost of this inaction, of doing the same thing that you've always done the day before, the month before, the year before, is going to cost you more this year than it did before, given all the data that's coming out. And quite frankly, the cost in all reality, the cost of the missed opportunity is huge. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to really try to push you, Jeff, to talk about specific examples of action and inaction, and then we're going to kind of contrast, inaction versus action, and we're going to talk about things people can really do right away. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Allie at the Power Practice. Every month when we talk to clients, staffing comes up as one of the biggest challenges. Finding the right people, avoiding costly hiring mistakes, and trying to build a team that actually sticks around. It can feel like an uphill battle, right? What if you could finally take the guesswork out of hiring? That's why we're so excited to bring you Hire Smart by Wonderlic and the Power Practice, a hiring solution designed specifically for eye care practices. Here's the game changer. Hire Smart doesn't just measure cognitive ability, problem-solving skills, and learning speed. It also gives you exclusive insights into a candidate's work style, adaptability, and even how they'll fit into your practice culture. Imagine making a confident, informed decision before you even make the hire. And the best part, we've made it affordable and easy to use so you can start building your dream team right away. If staffing has been stressing you out, it's time to turn things around. Visit thepowerpractice.com and click on Hire Smart to get started. Let's help you hire smarter and stress less.
All right, we're back with the Power Hour and Dr. Jeff Lewis in the studio. So I'm excited to kind of continue the discussion on this cost of inaction. Hopefully we're helping the audience see a different perspective on on getting stuck, really, as you described it, is that, we want to make sure that we realize that everything we do has a consequence, but we also realize that everything we don't do has a consequence. So I wanted to use the next part of this episode to talk a little bit about, cost of inaction in context of the actions you could be taking and you could be taking instead. And in some cases, relative to patient acquisition, think about what's out there in the market that's not in your chair and how do you do it?
Yeah, I love this topic. I love that, any of these, areas that we've discussed, so far, whether it's dry eye or, improving doctor production, they do have interesting, like, kind of downstream ROI effect because we, by addressing them, first of all, treating more dry eye patients is really good for everyone. It's good for the community. It's good for, it's just, it's an overlooked issue, and you end up feeling a lot better when you can own that part of, or own that type of specialty. But looking at patient acquisition and patient behavior, a lot of where I spend a lot of time looking at what is the patient behavior that is like. What types of decisions? What literally are patients typing in when they're looking for the services that our practices provide? And so there's a funnel that starts with search. There's a conversion along the way. There are conversions along the way. So someone finds you. I know you've covered this on other podcasts, but the idea is that you are found. Do your digital properties convert, whether they're coming in through your Google business profile or they're landing on your website or they're calling you? We are ideally tracking where those conversions are coming from. And many of them, oftentimes the vast majority of these conversions are phone calls. And, we talked a lot about phone calls, so we won't, belabor that point. But we know that by listening to phone calls, we understand, the percentages and the breakdown. We know, whether a patient found you from a digital property and they were calling because they were just checking on their glasses, we can eliminate that number. And again, you start with a large enough data set. And now we're talking about, we mentioned 25 to 30% of those patients are appointment opportunities. More than, maybe 70% are existing patients. And, that's important because if you didn't show up, then you've left yourself open, by not acting to optimize those properties. You've left yourself open to competition. But, a significant percentage of those patients are new and they've made it all the way to a phone call. And now we already know that, based on, we can generalize about the market, but I think for us, it's really important to kind of, drill down on what are the conversion rates associated with the new patient or the existing patient. But ultimately, we can say that the, new or any patient opportunity that's coming through, properties that you've invested in optimizing, that they're associated with, a revenue per patient number, and we can get to an actual dollar amount that gives us a very clear distinction between, what we may have spent for that, that marketing dollar. And we're talking about organic traffic now. PPC is another thing, but does that align?
Well, yeah. So I think what you're saying is go spend, I'm making this up, but you spend $2,000 and you get, I don't know, what somebody spends. Give an example of one of your clients. Somebody spent $5,000. What can you attribute to it?
Yeah, so I think average case, if someone is spending $5,000 and their digital properties are being optimized in the most efficient and according to best practices, that we're probably in the 10x range of what we're generating for that marketing spend.
Perfect. So let's just play this out for a second. And this is where we go to the cost of inaction. I'm going to bring it back to simple example at the beginning of the episode, right? Eugene, said, okay, I'm going to exercise. And so I decide that instead of, okay, so I'm going to go act. I'm going to go spend some amount of time exercising. Well, today I decided to exercise for 6 minutes. I could have spent 60, but I spent 6. I could have spent 30, but I spent 6. So what's the benefit I'm going to get? Well, I'm going to get more benefit than if I didn't do anything, but I'm not going to get as much benefit as if I would have spent 30. And there's probably, for a guy like me, I'm not a bodybuilder, so there's probably some diminishing return somewhere, right? I don't know where it is. I'm not a personal trainer, but maybe at the hour and a half mark, maybe at the 2 hour mark. I don't know where the diminishing returns is for a guy like me, but I bet that there's clear, proven scientific benefit between that 6 and that 60, or maybe even between that 6 and that 30, that I absolutely could, that I absolutely should be investing in. So this kind of, to translate back to your example, well, look, there's, I think, all the digital marketing tools and capacity and strategies have diminishing returns somewhere, right? You can't dump $200,000 into SEO in a rural community with I don't know 5,000 people and expect to see any sort of return on investment. But every single digital marketing strategy has some sort of return on investment, and that return on investment, finding the sweet spot of that diminishing returns, it's almost as bad as it's almost bad to it's definitely bad to spend too much, but it's probably just as bad to not spend enough, because in that particular case, you've got a cost of inaction problem there as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that translates also to the other side of this, and there's going to be diminishing return for the pay per click, or for paid campaigns, whether it's Facebook ads or Google ads, for example. I mean, it's a little bit of a different animal, and as technology has evolved, and one of the things that I'm super excited about is that because we've been able to, thanks to our ability now to integrate with the EHR and to be able to see like a schedule. Now we've gotten to this place where PPC can be resistant to cost of inaction. In that,
when you say PPC, what do you mean?
Pay-per-click advertising. So you're spending money to show up, in the advertising section of search results.
So yeah, you pay every single time, not just when you show up, you pay when somebody clicks on it.
Exactly.
And there's a cost to that click. And oftentimes, if you don't link that click, I think oftentimes people say, well, pick a number, $500 on Google Ads or PPC. And how did you pick that $500? Well, I don't know. That's what I picked. And is that too much? Is that too little? Is that so? We have to go down the next path, which is to say, okay, well, what's the cost per conversion? To your point, and the conversion could be a phone call, the conversion could be a scheduled appointment, the conversion could be something else. Well, and if the cost per conversion, I think the data showed that on Google Ads, most recently, I think last 3 months, it's been averaging around, I would call it like $20 for a typical eye care patient, maybe a little bit less. Yeah. And so that cost per conversion for a typical eye care patient. Now remember, that's not a patient in your chair yet. That's a patient who made a phone call, or a patient who scheduled an appointment. There's, of course, going to be a conversion rate that you have to follow. If you're terrible at picking up your phone, that conversion is going to be less valuable to you than if you're good at picking up your phone. And one of the points to your, I think to your point, Jeff, one of the key value propositions is that if your schedule is full for the next 3 weeks, you probably shouldn't spend any money on Google Ads, because that Google Ads patient wants to get in within the next few days. And there's some studies published on exactly when. But let's just call it when, under 72 hours is when that patient wants to get in. And if the answer is they can't find a slot on the schedule to support that want, then they might click back and see if somebody else has an appointment. Because that patient is really far down the funnel and they really don't want to schedule something 3 weeks out. So your point, the innovation that you're talking about is actually, kind of helping offset that cost of inaction. It's helping to solve the problem of exactly how many minutes a day should you actually be working out. Because if you look at the schedule and you say, okay, I got 27 appointments this week that are available, you would spend differently than if you looked at the schedule and said, I have 3 appointments this week. In fact, you would spend 0 on Google Ads if you had 3 appointments available, and you would spend a lot more if you had 27 until they filled up, and you would look at the schedule and you'd say, okay, great. I've got those filled. I'm looking at next week now. So point being is that I would absolutely spend, if I had the next 3 days, I had 27 appointments left, I would absolutely spend $20 for each of those appointments to fill those, because the doctor's already going to be there, the staff's already going to be there, the rent's already paid, the lights are already on. Like my marginal cost to bring that patient in the door is relatively low, right? Yeah. I would pay an incremental cost to bring that patient in the door, but my variable cost is very, very low to bring that patient in the door, and I would pay a little bit, knowing what my average per patient volume is. And this is when we relate it back to cost of inaction, I think what I'm hearing you say is that not doing something like that, not thinking of it that way, is really the inaction that you're describing.
Right. Exactly.
And so, let's now take it a step further and go back to our earlier example of, now it's not just a typical eye care patient. Now it's not just your, patient who's going to show up and you're going to put them in glasses and you're going to go through your regular capture rate, and and on average it's going to be a $350 patient, right? Because again, you think about, and we've talked about cost of acquisition before, but let's do the calculation of cost of inaction. If I left those 30 appointments open, okay, fine. If I left those 30 appointments open, that's the inaction. I didn't do anything. I didn't go spend the money to go fill those extra 30 appointments a week. Okay, so what does that cost us? Well, 30 appointments, and I had $350 per patient. So it's $10,000 that week, $40,000 that month. Now, if you really want to talk about profit in this case, which I'm not sure that we need to talk about profit, but if we did, okay, so let's say that in that particular case, those 30 appointments would have cost me $20 times 30 appointments. That's another $600. Right? So that's $600 I would have paid to get that $10,000. And then off of that $10,000, I would have probably spent $3,000 on frames and lenses. And I would have maybe had to spend, I don't know, another, $2,000 on my optometrist or my staff and that kind of thing, to, incrementally, if they even get paid for production. Maybe my optometrist is there no matter what happens. But worst case scenario, let's just call it like 50% of those dollars. So $4,000, $5,000 drop straight to the bottom line per week if you had 30 appointments available that week. That's 50. If that's $5,000 per week times 4, that's to $20,000 a month. That's just cost of inaction.
Right.
Yeah. And at the same time, if you're not using the sophisticated approach of looking at your schedule, and you're spending, and I've seen this happen far too many times. People do this with marketing all the time. They say, well, I'm just going to set a budget and I'm going to roll with that budget. So I'm going to spend $3,000 on Google Ads. Okay, great. You're spending $3,000 on Google Ads, but then your appointments are too far, you're booked too far out. So because you're too far out, you're now wasting those $3,000 of Google Ads. So not managing that and not reducing that might be costing you the cost of an action $3,000, or maybe some percentage of that $3,000. So I think this is where the sophistication comes in, to think about what are you doing deliberately, and then what are you not doing deliberately that you could be doing, that because for every single lever, or for every single opportunity, there's a lever that you can pull to solve that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's data all along the way. And so going back to the dry eye patient, and, kind of aligning with what we were talking about in terms of this, technology opportunity and how things are evolving. Now we have the ability to, or we are developing, we basically now have the ability to see where those patients are in your database. So, reactivation becomes now an area that we can associate with cost of inaction, because we can much more directly or target in a targeted way, look at the segments of where those patients exist already. And that, I think, is like, another type of holy grail, because, we're not talking to those segments currently in a very efficient way. But, as we, now are able to, like, it sort of, I think, highlights another area of cost of inaction, because we know that those campaigns, or when we reach out to patients, that there is data associated. We know how many of those patients will open. We know how many click, and so we can kind of figure out, right? We can figure out pretty specifically, like, what the cost, or what the cost of each of those kind of activities associated with
and that's another great point you bring up. If practices that are not doing strategic reactivation, you're just, think of your database of patients 13 months to 60 months or so since last exam. And I lecture on this very regularly. It's a bad topic near and dear to my heart. It's the easiest found money in any practice. I think maybe outside of the phones, but it's definitely in the contenders for top 3 easiest found points of found money in any practice. But strategic reactivation is very different than what you're doing for general recall. General recall is sending the same message, and it's sending the same message in various intervals. So those various intervals are, and it's true that if you got that, I've been the recipient of the Macy's emails, where you get the same email, oh, it's our flash sale, and it's our flash sale is starting, our flash sale is ending, our flash sale's tomorrow. It's just the same thing over and over again. I'm going to unsubscribe as quickly as I possibly can. And so the reason the software that most people use doesn't necessarily work well as a full reactivation tool is because they're cognizant. They don't want your patients to unsubscribe. So because they don't want your patients to unsubscribe, they're not going to send the same message over and over and over again and piss off your patients. But they only have one message to send. The message is, it's time for your eye exam, Dr. Lewis. So that message has to be spaced out substantially. And if that message is spaced out substantially, and most of the time that message doesn't actually go to anybody after 30 months, the reality is that you've got to have a different approach to reactivate those patients. But the data shows, and the data you're referencing is actually extremely compelling, that up to 22% of those patients between 13 and 60 months since last exam can be brought right back into your practice with a strategic reactivation strategy, which oftentimes involves segmented, thoughtful, intelligent, varying campaigns. So you're definitely sending them something different every single month, which is not necessarily all about, hey, it's time for your eye exam. It's something that adds value, but reminds them, in addition, that it's pretty good to get your eyes checked out, whether it's because your eyes are an indicator of your overall health, or whether it's because there's new fall fashions for your face, or whether it's the risk of a specific disease. But all of these are things that are different from the month before, which then does not lead to a high unsubscribe rate, which then keeps these people on your list. And what we know from a marketing standpoint is, if you're able to communicate with them every month, but with different messaging, that leads to a high percentage of those patients coming back in, which, to your point, is a huge cost of inaction if you're not doing that, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for every practice, even some of the smallest practices we've looked at. And in some cases, for some of the larger practices, millions of dollars is the cost of inaction for not leveraging strategic reactivation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. So I think, we've covered a lot here as we've tried to frame this topic as, cost of inaction is something we have to get away from the comfort of, doing what we did last week, last month, last year, and think towards the opportunity that exists within the day-to-day of what we're already doing, and just, do something that's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Really just question things a little bit more and really focus hard on trying to quantify and look at the metrics that everybody should be in their practice. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up today, Dr. Lewis?
No, I think that was I think we covered it pretty well. I think it's a great topic, and I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to discuss it with the audience.
All right. Well, thank you as always for being on the Power Hour, and grateful that you're able to share some of your time with us and the listeners, and look forward to all the listener feedback that's going to come from this one, and let us know what we should talk about next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to today's Power Hour episode. The Power Hour is actually owned by the Power Practice. Power Practice is a premier consulting group who helps practices achieve freedom of time, confidently solve practice issues, and grow their practices. They do this by having coaches and OD consultants, people who have actually done it, been there, and they're ready to help. If you want to learn more, go to powerpractice.com. There's a bunch of free tools there. You can also get a whole bunch of information and decide whether it's right for your practice. Again, if you're looking for more time, you're looking to solve complex practice issues or grow, the Power Practice might be right for you. Go to powerpractice.com to find out more.